The baby is still in the back room," Aunt Emily cried out, pointing to the burning room. After a long period of infertility treatment, they finally had their long-awaited child. She shakes off my hand and tries to go to the back room. There's no way Olivia's life can end like this. It was unbearable for me to lose the child that my lifesaver cherished more than her own life. I made up my mind and headed to the back. I was in a frenzy and don't remember much from this time. The moment I ran towards the front door, holding the crying baby in my arms and supporting Aunt Emily, a heated piece of furniture fell in front of me. It's hot. A distinct burn scar remained on my cheek. Most people turned their eyes away from the burn scar, but there was one woman who stared intently at that cheek. Could it be that you're the one from that time? My name is Eugene. I'm 37 years old and work at a craft brewery. Since it's a factory, for hygiene reasons, I'm dressed in all white work clothes from head to toe. Of course, I never forget to wear a mask. So much so that even I forget my own appearance. I feel the most at peace when I'm doing simple tasks at the factory. That's because I have something I deeply regret in my life, and when I have time, I can't help but think about it. It's my regret towards my mother, Sophia, who gave birth to and raised me. What? You didn't bring your lunch money again? Eating lunch like that is just dine and dash, isn't it? I was often teased by my classmates who saw the empty envelope in elementary school. Of course, the homeroom teacher knew my family situation well, so they didn't rush me, but my classmates couldn't be that considerate. I had mixed feelings about my mother, who couldn't give me a few dollars for lunch. By the way, my father passed away from illness when I was 3 years old. My mother was a single mother juggling 2 jobs while raising me, who was barely old enough to understand things. My mother worked even on holidays, but life was tough, and I remember rarely being able to buy new clothes. Naturally, my backpack was also a hand-me-down from the neighbors. Due to this family environment, it wasn't uncommon for us to be unable to pay for school lunch some months. I don't want that nasty stuff anyway, count me out. I talked back to my classmates, but that wasn't how I really felt. I was always starving. Lunchtime was the only happy time when I could feel full, but with my elementary school pride, I always argued with my classmates. That time was really hard for me. I felt like everyone was my enemy. On top of that, with the irritability characteristic of puberty, I started taking out my frustration on my mother in middle school. Did you argue with those kids again? The school called. Shut up. What does it matter? Whenever my mother spoke to me, I would respond in a rough voice, but I couldn't tell her it was because they made fun of my worn-out bag and small apartment. But my mother must have sensed how I felt, because she apologized to me in a small voice once. I'm sorry for making you go through such a hard time. No matter how horribly I spoke to her, my mother accepted it all, and she just waited for my heightened emotions to settle down. My mother, who worked from morning to night, must have been so exhausted that it was painful just to stand. Maybe she didn't even have the energy to talk back due to her extreme fatigue, and just stayed silent. It wasn't until I became a working member of society that I was able to see things from my mother's perspective. But by then, my mother was already gone. I'll never forget it. It was shortly after I entered high school. It was raining heavily since morning that day. I was irritated as usual. So before going to school, I said something terrible to my mother as usual. Why is everything in our house secondhand? Uniforms and bags. Mom, you say you're busy, but are you really working? I'm sorry. We're barely making the rent payments. I promise I'll buy you new things as soon as we have some leeway, so please wait a little longer. You pretend to be poor, but you're secretly living in luxury, aren't you? Everyone else can pay. It's weird that it's only me. Even though I was a high school freshman, everyone looked at me with puzzled faces as I took PE class wearing a gym uniform stained yellow with sweat. Of course, there were no classmates who would tease me about it in high school, but their kindness made me feel even more miserable. Why am I the only one who has to go through this because of my parents' circumstances? If I had been born into a different family, I wouldn't have had to feel this miserable. That's what I thought as I fell asleep and woke up to unpleasant mornings every day. The moment my irritation peaked, I uttered words that should never be said. You're not fulfilling your duties as a parent. I can make it on my own. I wish you'd just disappear, Mom. I remember the light fading from my mother's eyes at that moment as vividly as if I dreamed it. And I also remember how I felt as I turned my back on my mother and headed to school with force. I saw my mother standing in the doorway seeing me off, but I never looked back. That was the last time I saw my mother. When classes ended that day, I was hurriedly preparing to go home. That's when my homeroom teacher burst into the classroom with a pale face. "There you are. Come with the teacher to the hospital right now. Your mother collapsed at work. She's being treated at the hospital now." My mother went to work as usual, but she wasn't feeling well and had to leave early. While she was getting ready to go home, she suddenly collapsed on the floor and lost consciousness. As I paced around the hospital waiting room, a woman who lived in the neighborhood spoke to me. She was a woman who looked out for my mother, who worked as a single mother. Since we had no reliable relatives, my mother had designated that woman as an emergency contact, even though she wasn't a relative. The woman's name was Emily. She was in her mid-30s at the time. She had a youthful appearance, but I called her Aunt Emily. She gently stroked my anxious back. Then, after taking a deep breath, she said, "Let's go see your mother." I thought we were going to the hospital room where my mother was being treated. I wondered if she was wrapped in bandages, or if she had lots of tubes attached. I timidly entered the hospital room. Lying on the bed was my mother. Despite seeing her face every day, I felt an indescribable sense of unease. Her appearance was the familiar mother, but her skin had an artificial texture. Her weight should have been light, but I felt heaviness. Her lying figure was like a doll. This person is someone else. It's not my mother. When I said that in a clear tone, Aunt Emily gently hugged me. "Yes, that's right. I can't believe it either. But you know, we can't run away from it. Your mother, today." Aunt Emily said that much and then started crying. The moment I saw those tears, I made up my mind. But I didn't accept it. My last words to my mother were, "I wish you'd just disappear." And she really did disappear. Maybe I was the one who made my mother disappear. Actually, after I went to school, I reflected on various things. I was planning to apologize to my mother when I got home. That's why I was hurriedly preparing to go home. And yet, the reality is that I can never exchange words with her again. It's my fault. I'm sorry for saying those things. I clung to my mother's slightly warm body and apologized over and over. For more than 20 years since then, I would live with deep regret. I spent every day emptying my heart, deliberately distancing myself from happiness, thinking that I shouldn't be allowed to be happy after saying such terrible things. After my mother's funeral, I faced an even harsher reality. My relatives discussed who would take me in. The relatives were already busy just taking care of their own children. "We can do it. Please take him." They pushed me back and forth. I was clearly a burden. I felt unbearable. In that case, how about Eugene staying at my house until he graduates high school? Then he won't have to transfer schools either. The relatives were overjoyed at the unexpected offer of help and entrusted me to her. Emily's husband was Kevin. I called him Uncle Kevin. As the president of a group company, they had the financial means to take in just me without struggling to make ends meet. The couple had no children at the time. They wanted children but couldn't conceive easily, so they were continuing fertility treatment. Perhaps because of this background, the two of them doted on me. All my second-hand uniforms, bags, and gym clothes were replaced with new ones. Half a year after I started living at Aunt Emily's house, life took root in Aunt Emily's belly. The pregnancy was known earlier, but considering the worst-case scenario, they officially told me when she entered a stable period. Even though I had noticed the growing belly and the joyous occasion, it was the first time in a while that I felt the emotion of happiness, given that it was their long-awaited baby. "Eugene, what do you think would be a good name for the baby? I'm having trouble deciding, so could you think about it with me? Is it a boy or a girl?" "Well, it's not that I don't know, but that's a secret. I thought of names for both patterns, in case it was a boy or a girl. I proposed the name Ethan for a boy and Olivia for a girl. I want them to believe in the possibilities of the future and take off with hope." Holding a thick dictionary in my hand, I came up with a name filled with such thoughts. Of course, I never dreamed that my idea would be adopted, since I wasn't even a relative. However, the name given to the girl born 6 months later was Olivia. This decision was based on Aunt Emily's feelings towards me. "Your mother's situation is very sad. But if you remain at a standstill, your mother will be saddened, right? You have to live your life to the fullest for the sake of this new life. From today, you are the baby's namesake. You are a one and only existence to this child. That's why your existence in this world has meaning. I was bound by a sense of guilt, feeling that I would be punished if I felt happiness. Aunt Emily, sensing this, deliberately made me the baby's namesake. Thanks to her kindness and consideration, I gradually became able to move forward. Worried about Aunt Emily, who was busy taking care of the baby, I, who was about to graduate high school, sometimes helped out by doing things like shopping. We're having curry today, so please get ground meat, onions, and pickled vegetables. It would be great if you could also get a carton of milk and some lettuce. Don't push yourself too hard, okay? I bought everything I was asked for and headed home with bulging shopping bags. Then, perhaps carried by the wind, the smell of something burning wafted by. Looking ahead, I saw black smoke billowing up from the residential area. I had a bad feeling. At the same time, I told myself it couldn't be. Still worried, I walked home faster than usual, and sure enough, it was as I feared. The house I'd grown used to living in was engulfed in flames. Neighbors gathered outside the house, peering worriedly inside. I scanned a crowd over and over, but Emily was nowhere to be seen. Where's Aunt Emily? She was inside the house before I left. Well, you see, I'm worried too, but... Interrupting those words, a male firefighter shouted loudly. There's one woman inside, and I hear a baby crying. The stairs visible through gaps in the flames were charred black. The kitchen where Emily was is in the back. Olivia was probably in the small room in the back. A sense of guilt took over my heart again. Because I spoke those heartless words that day, will I lose not only my mother, but also Aunt Emily, and even Olivia? I'll give up all happiness. I don't need a single cent of money. I just want the lives of my loved ones to be saved. I kept praying in front of the collapsing house. The moment a pillar fell with a cracking sound, I heard a woman scream, "Aunt Emily, we gotta hurry and save her, gotta go right now." At that moment, I couldn't hear anyone's voice anymore. Shaking off the firefighter's hand trying to stop me, I leapt into the burning house. "What are you doing? It's dangerous. Come back immediately." Scream-like voices echoed, but my mind was made up. The inside of the house was in worse condition than I imagined. It was so hot I couldn't open my eyes. Covering my mouth with a handkerchief so as not to breathe in smoke, I headed towards the kitchen where Emily was likely to be. When I finally made it to the kitchen, Emily was there as expected. "Olivia is here. She's in that room." After a long period of infertility treatment, they finally had their long-awaited child. She tries to go to the back to save Olivia, but her head is confused and her body won't move properly. She must have lost strength from despair. She slumped down next to the refrigerator. "It's dangerous here. Please hurry and escape." When I called out to her, Emily said in a weak voice, "You hurry and get out. I'm staying here because Olivia is here. I'll bring her. So please, you have to live too. There's no way Olivia's life can end like this." Saying that, I headed to the small room. Luckily the fire hadn't spread that far yet. But for Olivia, it was a terrifying space. Not understanding what was happening, she was screaming and crying. Holding Olivia's small body in my arms, I went back to where Emily was. "Olivia is okay. Hold on to me and let's hurry and escape." Carrying Olivia and Emily, I mustered all my remaining strength and headed in the direction where the front door should be. This is as far as my memory goes. It's hot. When I opened my eyes, a pure white ceiling spread out in front of me. The moment I thought this might be heaven, what appeared before my eyes was the face of a man. It was Uncle Kevin, peering at my face with a worried look. "Ack, it hurts." I tried to move my body, but something was strange. My arms were wrapped in bandages. "Don't push yourself." If you'd escaped 1 second later. Uncle Kevin's face was a mess with tears. He said he heard about the fire and rushed back from work in a panic. "What about Aunt Emily?" "Oh, she's fine. Maybe because she inhaled smoke. She wasn't feeling well for a while, but now she's back to her usual self." Strangely enough, despite being caught in such a fire, she didn't have a single injury. Thank goodness. "That's right. How is Olivia doing?" When I asked that, Uncle Kevin stroked my head and said this. "Don't worry. Olivia was safe too. But you protected the two of them and ended up like this. This was the first time I learned that a heated piece of furniture fell and I suffered a burn on my face. I hardly remembered it, but now that he mentioned it, to protect Olivia from the falling furniture, it was especially bad around my cheek. The nerves must be paralyzed because I can't feel anything. The discolored skin told of the severity of the burn. It was something I found out later, but the cause of the fire seemed to be carelessness with fire by an apartment resident. For a while, every time I recalled the scene of the fire, I suffered from a sensation of my chest being squeezed tight with fear and anxiety. I was allowed to see Emily a week later. Emily was lying calmly on the bed. She inhaled a large amount of smoke, so she was under observation just in case. As soon as Emily saw my face covered in bandages and gauze, she must have been overcome with emotion because she suddenly burst into tears. "I'm so sorry. I accidentally dozed off. Because I did something like that, your cheek ended up like this. Don't cry like that. I'm just glad you're okay. By the way, how is Olivia? I heard from your husband that she's doing well, but right now, she's in a different room under observation, just in case. In case she inhaled smoke too, and in case her condition suddenly changes." Olivia had restricted visitation, so I was reunited with Olivia a month later. She was diagnosed as having no issues by the doctor and was able to be discharged safely. At the hospital entrance, the couple deeply thanked me. "Thank you so much. Thanks to you, Olivia and I are alive now. I'll spend my whole life repaying the favor from that day, so please forgive me for this happening to you. Don't forget, you don't have to worry about anything. About the burns, about your future. We'll support you as much as possible in whatever you want to do. So please don't push yourself, and take your time getting treatment for the burns." It was much later that I understood the meaning of their words. The couple decided to get rid of the house that had become a place of terror and move far away. Strangely enough, when my mother passed away, everyone was quite reluctant, but for some reason this time everyone was eager to take me in. I felt uneasy about how quickly the relatives changed their tune, and it was also painful to be separated from the couple, but I couldn't rely on them forever. Taken in by relatives, I ended up commuting an hour each way to school. I couldn't imagine the relatives spending that much money for my sake. I was prepared to go back to a high school life using hand-me-downs, but unexpectedly, I didn't have much trouble financially. However, whether I had a place to belong was another story. My relatives never looked directly at the burn scar on my cheek. It was the same with my classmates. I wasn't bullied, but I was almost never invited to hang out. But I don't hide my cheek. For me, this burn scar represents my connection to Uncle Kevin and Aunt Emily, who were kind to me. And it's like proof that I saved Olivia's life. It was natural for me to live with this cheek for the rest of my life. The wind changed direction again around the time I became a high school senior. My relatives gathered frequently to discuss my future path. The truth was that my relatives wanted to stop taking care of me after high school. I realized that the only path left for me was to get a job. I'm gonna move out and work after I graduate high school. When I made that declaration, my relatives were overjoyed, saying it was very welcome. I myself didn't feel at all at home in my relative's house, so it's true that I wanted to become independent as soon as possible. However, I had no education or skills. Furthermore, with my cheek in this condition, it would be difficult to do a job that involved facing people. Where I ended up was a job at a craft brewery in the countryside. It was the perfect workplace for me, who had nowhere to belong, with almost free rent for company housing. Thank you for everything. Even though I'm not your real son, you've taken care of me this much. I'm truly grateful. Now that it's come to this, let bygones be bygones. I thanked them profusely, with all the words of gratitude I could muster. From April, I moved out of my relative's house where I spent my high school years and started working at the craft brewery. During work at the factory, a large mask is a must, so no one cares about my face. However, thanks to regular treatment and surgeries, the condition of my cheek has improved considerably. The medical expenses, which must have been a considerable amount, were paid by my relatives, but at the time, I had no way of knowing how a regular relative's family had that much money or what they paid without complaining. One time, a close salesperson asked me to accompany them to a department store buyer to pitch a high-end craft beer that sells for $6 per block. They seemed to want to explain the manufacturing process thoroughly to demonstrate the reasonableness of the price. I don't mind going with you at all, but my face is like this. It might give a bad impression. You're overthinking it. This car isn't as noticeable as you think. You're now demonstrating your abilities as a leader in manufacturing, right? It's an important sales pitch, so we need your help. Please, I'm begging you this time. I was 37 years old at the time. Since most of the manufacturing staff works part-time, I, as a full-time employee, am entrusted with a fair amount of responsibility. If a salesperson needs an escort here, it would probably be me, a full-time employee who has worked here for a long time. Understood. I'll do my best to be of help. The salesperson and I took connecting trains and headed to a department store in a prime location in the city center. Having lived in the countryside for a long time, the store interior was so dazzling it made me dizzy. While waiting in the meeting room we were shown to, the man in charge of purchasing entered. A woman followed behind the man. The moment I saw that woman, I caught my breath. The woman who appeared before me was probably in her early 20s. Light skin, shining black hair, well-defined features. She wasn't particularly tall, but her moderate height gave a sense of familiarity. Even though I was at work, I was captivated by her beautiful appearance. According to the person in charge of purchasing, she was originally hired as a salesperson, but her potential was highly evaluated and she was assigned to the sales department. She is fluent in German, so she is gaining experience with overseas assignments in mind. Nice to meet you. I'm Olivia, a new employee. I'll be sitting in on this meeting today for training purposes. Hearing the name Olivia, my heart started racing. I unintentionally stared intently at her face. Then she stared right back at me and asked this. Have we met somewhere before? Oh, no, we haven't. I'm sorry. Feeling that she found me suspicious, I shook my head side to side, denying it. Surprised by our disjointed exchange, the salesperson explained about the burn scar on my cheek. He has a burn scar on his cheek, but he got it when he was a high school student, disregarding the danger to his own life to save his benefactor. There aren't many people who can do something like that. That's exactly why I trust him more than anyone. Actually, the president and employees of the craft brewery always said things like that to me on a daily basis. So it wasn't particularly special for the salesperson to explain it this way. But I didn't miss it. The woman's complexion changed in an instant. After the presentation for the high-end craft beer ended, while waiting for the salesperson to return from the restroom, that beautiful employee came over to where I was, and she handed me a small folded memo. Come to this address later. Hearing her unexpected words, my heart started pounding. She must have known I was staying overnight for a business trip. The specified time was that night. The address looked familiar. It was the address of the house where I spent happy days. The modest smile, rounded facial features, beautiful clear voice. There was an aura about her that I'd seen somewhere before. Just like Emily, who took care of me 20 years ago. Making various excuses to the salesperson, I headed to the specified location. It's a parking lot now with no trace left, but that dear old house used to be there. A woman is standing there. It was Olivia, the beautiful employee I met earlier. Could it be that your uncle and aunts? Before I could think of what to say, my mouth moved on its own. I knew it was you, Eugene. You saved me and my mother during the fire. It was Olivia, the precious only daughter of Uncle Kevin and Aunt Emily. I was at a loss for words at the sudden reunion with someone I had completely given up on. How's your cheek? It's in worse condition than I thought. It looks like this, but strangely it doesn't bother me at all. When I said that in a cheerful voice, Olivia's eyes welled up with tears. I was raised being told by my parents at every opportunity that without you, we wouldn't have the life we have now. That's why I always wanted to thank you. It's as if I changed your life. Olivia feels guilty about living a life of comfort while I don't. It was a feeling very similar to the sense of guilt I had about losing my mother. Actually, my father passed away early on, and my mother also left this world due to illness. I was always lonely, but I was saved by her parents. Even now, I have absolutely no regrets about leaping into the flames to save Aunt Emily and you that time. I could actually get it fixed up nicely with surgery. Then hurry up and get the surgery. I'll come up with the money. It's okay. Because this cheek is my pride. and it's also proof of the happy days I spent with my benefactors. Actually, every time I look at this cheek, I always remember Uncle Kevin, and Emily, and you when you were little. And I've lived feeling immersed in the feeling that I'm not alone. Olivia listens to my story while wiping away tears. With misty eyes, she gently grasps my hand, a warmth I haven't felt in a long time. Feeling Olivia's body heat, I remember the peaceful, happy days when I used to play with Olivia as a baby. I have a vague memory of the fire 20 years ago. I was a baby, so I don't know the details, but sometimes I dream about that day. Everything in front of me is bright red, and I'm crying because I'm so scared. Then a young man picks me up and says it's okay. I always wake up there, so I can never remember who it is, but those arms are so warm and I feel completely at ease. Now I can clearly remember. The one who picked me up was you. The woman who was a baby back then has grown up beautifully and is standing in front of me. Are Uncle Kevin and Aunt Emily doing well? I didn't know if it was okay to contact them. I really want to see them. My parents might get mad at me for telling you this, but to take responsibility for your burns, they were paying for your medical expenses and tuition. And for a while after that, they were in touch with your relatives. My parents said that if you wanted to go to college, they would cover all the expenses, but when they found out that the money they had been giving was being embezzled, the moment they pointed that out, the relatives stopped answering the phone. My parents are still worried about you. I think they would be really happy to know that they can see you. Hearing Olivia's story, the dots connected for me. The fact that my relatives paid for the not inexpensive burn treatments without complaint. The fact that various expenses were never late during my time in high school. The fact that for a while my relatives were pushing me to go to college. Uncle Kevin and Aunt Emily were putting out money for my sake. That's why my relatives were happy to take me in, secretly getting a piece of the pie. Honestly, I still can't believe this miracle. For 20 years, I kept thinking about all of you. Even if the day never came when I could see you, I was happy just thinking about you. Reunited with the daughter of my lifesavers, I couldn't help but get emotional. Embarrassingly, large tears flowed and wouldn't stop. Olivia was the same way. She was sobbing, saying she didn't know how to thank me and that she would do anything if there was something she could do. I can say I was happy at my relative's house, but they took care of me until I safely graduated high school. That was thanks to the couple's unstinting support. You've more than repaid any favor. I was able to receive sufficient treatment at the hospital and graduate high school. Soon after that, I had the opportunity to have a meal with Uncle Kevin, and Emily, and Olivia. Although entering their early elderly years, the two seemed to be doing well. You must have been through all sorts of things over these 20 years. I'm sure there were good times and bad times, but we want you to be happy. Actually, I heard from your boss and CEO. Everyone assessed you as a trustworthy employee. I was surprised. Uncle Kevin had been in contact with the CEO of my company. There's not much I can do as a high school graduate, so I haven't done anything significant. I'm a high school graduate too. I started working under my father right after graduating high school. Back then it was a small family-run store, but I'm proud of that. It's because I gained a lot of experience in the field that I have my current position, and I take pride in that too. If you're valued this much in the field, you must still have room to grow. As your CEO said, there's no way someone who helps others without regard for their own danger could be untrustworthy. So I have a proposal. How about working for us to make the company even bigger? Saying that, Uncle Kevin held out his large, rough hand. He is a wealthy president, but his hands are those of someone who has engaged in labor. The one who gave me a push when I was hesitating was Aunt Emily. You should be more proud of yourself. I think what you did that day is the most admirable thing in the world. I wasn't alone after all. Everyone was always watching over me. I'm so happy to see everyone again like this. I grasped Uncle Kevin's hand in return and sobbed. I was embarrassed to show such an unseemly side of myself in front of people at this age. As for Olivia, she was crying while laughing. It became an unforgettable time for us. After that, I left the craft brewery on good terms. Uncle Kevin decided on a large transaction, saying that the fact that the CEO and employees of the craft brewery evaluated me without caring about my appearance was proof that they could be trusted. The high-end craft beer in question would also be handled at the supermarkets of the subsidiary company. By the way, I'm in the middle of learning a new job. The job is managing a supermarket. Right now, I'm a regular employee, but in the future, the plan is for me to become the CEO of this subsidiary company. Uncle Kevin is kind at home, but he is strict and uncompromising when it comes to work. This was out of kindness, so that I wouldn't lose to any dissenting opinions that might arise when promoting a family member. Still, it was comfortable for me. Growing up under a strict father and finding peace with a kind mother, it was none other than the world I had longed for many years, having lost my parents at a young age. By the way, Eugene, Olivia says she wants to invite you to dinner. Why don't we wrap up work around here and have dinner out tonight? Yes, I'd love to. All right then, I'll leave the rest to you. I felt something was off about Uncle Kevin's words, "I'll leave the rest to you." The meaning of these words became clear when I arrived at the restaurant that had become our meeting place. The only one in the private room of the restaurant that Uncle had reserved was Olivia, who was still working hard at her sales job. On this day, Olivia and I spent a leisurely, happy time together, just the two of us. I had feelings for Olivia that went beyond being her namesake, although I kept them secret. And a year later, in between our busy days, Olivia and I visited the cemetery where my mother rests. Sitting in front of the grave with our hands together in prayer, Olivia started murmuring in a small voice, "I finally got to meet you. You are my lifesaver. Because you gave birth to Eugene, I have the life I have now. Thank you." Seeing Olivia expressing her gratitude to my mother, I became ashamed of my past words and actions. As for me, I had only resented my mother, because I wasn't the kind of son to be praised. As if seeing through my heart, Olivia told me a story I was hearing for the first time. "Your mother always bragged about you to my parents, saying you were her pride and joy. She said that even though you were going through such a hard time, you were still going to school properly, so she had to do her best too. That's why my mother said she wanted me to grow up to be a strong child like you, and she gave me the name Olivia that you came up with." This was the first time I felt the warmth of my mother staying by my side. My mother was always thinking of me. I just hadn't noticed it. Suddenly, Olivia fidgeted and said something shocking. "I want to be by your side too." What do you mean by that?" "I want you to go out with me, with the premise of marriage." Olivia confessed to me. I was at a loss at this development I hadn't even anticipated. "Are you sure you want me? My face is like this, and I'm not young." Then Olivia said, with an embarrassed smile, "Even babies can fall in love at first sight, you know. If I marry Olivia, Uncle Kevin will be my father-in-law. Aunt Emily will be my mother-in-law. I will go from being Olivia's namesake to being her husband. I can become a real part of this family." At this moment, I made up my mind. I won't say I'm sorry to my mother ever again. Instead, I'll say thank you. That must be what my late mother wished for too. The scenery in front of me suddenly became vibrant. My mother, who always looked like she was about to cry, smiled. I kind of got that feeling. My mother, who I'm proud of, was resilient.